Welcome to the first ever Pittsburgh Sports Castle Podcast. My name's Rachael Kriger, and I am joined by two of my friends. We have Cody Flavell, who just told me the actual pronunciation of his last name, and I have to say I'm shook because I've known him for, what, Cody, like 3-4 years now, and I never knew how to pronounce your last name until now.
It's a common mistake.
I understand too, because I'm Kriger and I get called Kriger, and like everything in the book, and I'm just like, there's no U. What are you doing? And then we also have A.J. Menendez here tonight for our first ever show. So this is exciting. This is something, an idea that we've kind of, as an editorial group, have been talking about for probably about a year now. Joe and I have always Joe Sinello, of course, is the guy who started the Pittsburgh Sports Castle website, and we've always talked about starting a podcast, and it just kind of never went anywhere. And I had, long story short, my friend Eric Watkins and I do a podcast together, and he's had some issues with his equipment, so I was like, you know what? Excuse me, why not? I'll get some equipment. I finally learned how to use it. And I messaged Cody and AJ, I think yesterday, and I was like, hey, let's just do an episode tomorrow. Why not? Let's see what happens. So this is a new adventure for us. There are probably going to be mistakes, especially on my end, because this is my first time hosting and kind of producing a show. So this should be interesting. It should be fun. But we're excited about it. We've had the Pittsburgh Sports Castle website since June 2015, which is crazy to believe. Myself, Joe, and Jason McDermott were original members. We had a lot of other members. Some of them stayed, some of them did not. All great people, but we've got a really, really solid group of writers, photographers, contributors, and we are by the fans, for the fans. And that's something that Joe has always really stuck with as like our motto. Like, that's our thing. So we're excited to get into it. Do you guys have any opening sentiments?
Not really. I'm excited to jump in, like you guys said, like you said, and I think it's going to be a fun adventure, and hopefully it'll continue and get better as we go along.
Yeah, I got nothing to add. This will be a fun experience.
Yeah, for sure. Podcasting is one of my favorite things to do. So let's get into it. The NFL draft just happened, so that is going to be our main topic tonight. Of course, we are talking about the Steelers, but we also have some stuff later about, you can't talk about the NFL draft this year without talking about Joe Burrow. There was some news with Green Bay and then some other stuff that we'll get into. But for the Steelers, they had a few picks, obviously not a first-round pick because of the mid-season trade to bring Minkah Fitzpatrick to Pittsburgh, giving Miami that pick. So the Steelers, for their first pick in the second round, chose Chase Claypool, a wide receiver out of Notre Dame. And then for their following picks, they brought in Alex Highsmith, a linebacker from Charlotte, Anthony McFarland Jr., a running back from Maryland. This one kind of seems to have a little bit of controversy around it, so I'm excited to dive in with you guys about that. Kevin Dotson, and an offensive guard from Louisiana, Antoine Brooks Jr., a safety from Maryland, and Carlos Davis, a defensive tackle from Nebraska. Guys, what are your official, first thoughts on these guys, and what was your reactions when they picked them? Cody, let's throw it to you first.
So I, for one, actually like this draft class. I know it's been a very, I don't want to say attacked topic, but I think a lot of people are kind of upset with the way the draft went. However, I like it. I think that it was more geared towards grabbing depth for this year's team, more so as it was finding starters. I think with a lot of the guys on defense, I think it's 10 out of the 11 on defense that are returning outside of Javon Hargrave. They really didn't need to find any starters on defense. I think the Highsmith pick is going to be awesome for their depth, especially if Bud Dupree does not return after next season. I like the Antoine Brooks move. I think they needed safety, and it's going to be some nice depth to push Terrell Edmonds. I think that he's one of the guys on defense that shouldn't have a long leash. I think they should be able to maybe give him some competition to have him play a little better. The Carlos Davis pick, I think he's a contender to possibly play on defense, especially with Javon Hargrave moving on. I think a lot of people kind of didn't like the Chase Claypool pick. I think especially because they may have reached to get him. I mean, his measurables are very comparable to Calvin Johnson, the way I see it. The biggest problem is I don't think he has a defined position. I mean, a lot of people think he's going to transition to become a tight end in the NFL as opposed to staying a wide receiver. But he's going to be another big target for Roethlisberger, especially with him coming back from the arm injury and having a guy like Ebron, McDonald, bigger targets like that. He should fit in well. I don't know how much he'll actually play, but he was a special team stud at Notre Dame. So I think that's something that the Steelers do place a high premium on. I think they proved that with the Derek Watt signing as well earlier in the offseason. But that's really all the thoughts I have on it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too with the defense with about depth. I think that, defense is in pretty much good shape. They do need that depth just in case if there are those injuries. And then on offense, one thing that I saw today, kind of just looking to kind of prepare for the draft, there was a quote from offensive coordinator Randy Feichner, and he said about Chase Claypool, he said, "There is no job too small. He will block. He will volunteer for special teams. This guy is a football player. He has a lot of unique traits for the position, a lot of things to be really excited about. He gives you potential red zone threat. He is an outside position player first and gives you the option of playing in the slot well." So I think that your kind of comparison there to Calvin Johnson is pretty spot on. I also thought, given whatever he did off the field out of the way, he reminds me of stature-wise Martavis Bryant. So I think that's interesting too. AJ, what are your thoughts on the draft and who the Steelers brought into the organization?
I like it. We brought out, like what Cody said, we brought out a lot of depth. I feel like if I was hoping in the second round we would have taken J.K. Dobbins, but Chase Claypool seems like a good pickup. And the Steelers have had a good history of picking wide receivers, so I'll trust them on that.
Yeah, I think the wide receiver topic was really interesting because the Steelers weren't, they weren't up there in the second round. They were kind of in the middle, so to say. So I think that, everyone was talking about that this is such, getting Joe Burrow out of the way for a second, that it was such a wide receiver heavy draft and that there were so many good wide receivers to pick from, and all of them just kept going and going and going before the Steelers. So I'm interested to see what Chase Claypool is going to bring. I mentioned earlier there's a little bit of kind of controversy about Anthony McFarland Jr., the running back from Maryland, being drafted. A lot of people were kind of hoping that they would find somebody from a more well-known football school or just somebody with better stats. I hear he has a couple, injuries lingering. So do you guys have any worries about his draft pick?
Go ahead, AJ.
I don't have any at all. Since Mike Tomlin probably knows this kid well, since his son is a teammate of Anthony McFarland Jr.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think that when you look at a guy like McFarland, there is a lot of talk about some potential character issues as far as like his locker room relations and whatnot. I like the pick. Obviously, it's not the quote-unquote sexy pick like a J.K. Dobbins or Jonathan Taylor would have been. Not that Taylor was available when we picked, but when you look at it from that standpoint, I mean, like I said, it's not the sexy pick, but I think he's a guy that can fit in with this team. And, the only issue I have, like Rachel mentioned with the injuries, is that we already have a pretty injury-riddled, running back locker room with, James Conner's had his injury struggles. They have a guy like Benny Snell already. There's no guarantee that Jalen Samuels is still going to be here next year. Now that they have another running back, it's going to be a crowded room. So,
yeah, I think those are all legitimate concerns. I think when you brought up the locker room thing, what immediately came to me was when Ben Roethlisberger kind of was it James Washington that he kind of put on blast for like going and talking to the media or something like 2 years ago?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, and I think if anyone's going to shape up a player for the NFL, I think it's going to be the likes of Ben Roethlisberger and Mike Tomlin, because Mike Tomlin is kind of a no-nonsense guy. There's talk of him, losing the locker room, which is a topic for another day, but I think that he is going to come in there, Mike Tomlin, of course, and demand the respect and make sure that these players know that if they don't treat him with respect, that they're not going to make it in the NFL. If you can't treat your coach with respect, then you're not going to get a playing time at all. So I think that all of those are legitimate concerns. Any picks that kind of stand out to you guys as being, a need to fill type pick?
I liked the Dotson move, the kid from Louisville. I think, especially with Ramon Foster retiring, there was a need to kind of fill in on the offensive line. I don't foresee many of these other draft picks besides maybe Claypool seeing a lot of time this year. And I think Dotson's one of those guys that certainly will see some time, injuries or not. They had a need on the offensive line, and I think that pick really filled it. And he's a guy that had the talent to go a little bit higher, but he had some injury concerns, and I think he was still there because of that. So to get him in the later round and kind of really solidify what was not a lackluster class, but as I said, it wasn't necessarily the kind of draft class I think that a lot of fans wanted to see. It did a lot more to fill the depth, and I think Dotson's actually one of the guys that could see a lot of playing time and even start if needed.
AJ, anybody for you really stand out that you could see fill in a hole that really needed to be filled for the Steelers?
I'll say Antoine Brooks Jr. Since Terrell Edmonds, he could be very consistent at times. I feel like if this kid is very hungry for it, he could, give Terrell Edmonds a run for his money.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was just about to bring that up too. Cody had mentioned earlier that, you need to put him on kind of a shorter leash, so to say. So I think that that's a good call too. I think they're all pretty solid picks. Like Cody mentioned, the depth. I think that is super important, and the Steelers have learned the hard way about depth. So, we kind of talked what we like and what we don't like about these picks, and, impact-wise, whether they see playing time, little or small. What kind of impact do we think that these guys are going to have for the Steelers this year? Whether it's just, being another voice of support or, helping guys study the playbook or whatnot. What could we see from these type of guys this coming season?
As I said, I think this was more geared towards getting a lot of depth guys. And as I said, I don't think there's a lot of guys that are going to see a substantial amount of playing time. I mean, they'll all probably see the field at some point. But when you look at somebody like McFarland, I mean, there's the potential that he's probably going to be second or third on the depth chart, depending on whether or not he can beat out a guy like Benny Snell. Because I personally don't think Jalen Samuels has a spot on this team anymore. I think he's more of a tight end / fullback kind of guy, and the Steelers filled both of those positions this offseason. So I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't have a spot on the team. Other than that, I see Chase Claypool kind of as a special teams guy and maybe getting acquainted with Ben as the season goes on. But those are the guys I think have the biggest impact.
I think Chase Claypool definitely is going to have a huge impact this year, too, just because there's already people talking and saying that he is going to be the replacement for Juju Smith-Schuster. AJ, do you agree with that, or are you saying give Juju more time?
I just want to see how he does this year with Ben back, because maybe last year he just had a slump without Ben. So I want to see how he does with Ben first before I have like a definitive opinion on that.
Sure. Yeah, definitely makes sense. And to the point about depth too, these guys are very aware. Highsmith said in an interview with the Steelers, he said, quote, "They talked to me about being a special teams guy this year and being the guy backing up Bud Dupree and TJ Watt. I'm just so excited to learn from those two guys, two of the best pass rushers in the league." So these guys are well aware that they are depth guys, that they are not going to be out there the first game of the year starting and getting, however so many minutes of football there is in a game. They're not going to get the whole time allotted for them. They're going to be guys that come in as, rotation players and whatnot. So I think that is important in itself, that this guy literally just got drafted and he already understands that he is going to be a backup and that he is going to be a special teams guy, which is where a lot of guys in the NFL kind of get their start. So any final thoughts on the Steelers and how they drafted guys?
No, I'm just kind of excited to see where this draft class is really a couple years down the road. Because, like I said, I don't think these are guys that are going to make an immediate impact. And I think this is more geared towards maybe a few years into the future. And it'll be good to see how they fit in.
AJ, any final thoughts on the Steelers and the draft that they had?
I like their draft. I like the insurance pick with Alex Highsmith, just in case Bud Dupree leaves. I like Kevin Dotson move a lot. Just a great infusion of youth for our offensive line.
Awesome. So let's move on to kind of more general NFL draft topics. I said it at the beginning of the show, and I'm going to say it again. Can't have an NFL draft podcast, article, conversation this year without talking about Joe Burrow. And to be totally honest and to be totally transparent with everyone who's listening and with you guys, I did not pay attention as much to college football this last year as I would have years before. Why? The Sounders made the playoffs, of course. But I thought it was a typo when I saw that Joe Burrow threw for 60 touchdowns in 2019. That is ridiculously insane. And I don't know if he's just playing really, really, really bad teams or if he's just that good. But of course, the Cincinnati Bengals, it was kind of well known when the draft order was finalized that the Bengals were going to pick up Joe Burrow. The quarterback from LSU also played at Ohio State for a couple years. So he's in the AFC North. He's going to see the Steelers twice a year. Of course, he's going to see the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens twice a year as well. Cincinnati was not good last year. What do we think about Joe Burrow? Are we believing the hype? And can he turn around the Bengals? Cody.
Well, I like Joe Burrow. I think it's pretty clear to say that he had a very good season last year. He did it in the SEC, so he did it against some very good college teams. Now, however, there's not necessarily a lot of NFL defenses in the SEC. It's the closest that you can get as far as college football standards are concerned. But I do believe that Joe Burrow is going to have a really good career. I know a lot of people are anointing him as the next Tom Brady, and I'm not ready to go that far yet. I think that, especially in Cincinnati, it is truly a poorly run organization. I think they've proven that over the last couple of seasons. They gave Marvin Lewis way too many opportunities to turn things around. They've been in a flux at quarterback ever since Andy Dalton took over. And Burrow's going to have a lot of weapons. I mean, he's got Joe Mixon at running back. He should get A.J. Green back potentially this year. Tyler Boyd's turned himself into a really good receiver. But the defense is still very porous. I think Burrow definitely mask a lot of the problems that the Bengals do have. And I think that he's going to be good for maybe 2 or 3 extra wins that Cincinnati hasn't come up with in the past few seasons. So I'm not willing to write Burrow off, but I'm not sure that any career that he's going to have in Cincinnati is going to amount to much winning. However, I think it's worth allowing him to have a chance, and we'll see what happens. But personally, like I said, I like Burrow. We'll see what he does, but especially in the AFC North, he's going to struggle. I mean, he's going to face some really good defenses. The Ravens have a beefed up defense. We saw what the Steelers did last year. The Browns are a little bit better on defense this year. They're going to be, it's going to be a tough division to win in. And I still see Cincinnati being the seller team in the AFC North. And I think for at least the first 2 years, Burrow is going to struggle to come up with wins.
I think it's interesting with Joe Burrow, kind of looking at him off of the football field for a second, that the media isn't really giving him the Baker Mayfield treatment. And by the Baker Mayfield treatment, I mean, like when Baker was drafted, it was, he needs to turn the Cleveland Browns around right now, and he needs to do it this year, or we're just going to write Baker Mayfield off. But with Joe Burrow, I think people are kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, he's really good, but the Bengals aren't good, and we need like 2 or 3 years for him to kind of, get more the Bengals to get more draft picks, to get more weapons for Joe Burrow, and then they can right the ship. So I think it's really interesting to kind of see the dynamic of Joe Burrow entering the NFL with, in my opinion, less pressure than maybe Baker Mayfield did. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not, but it's just kind of like my viewpoint of how I've seen the media kind of talking about him and the Bengals. AJ, what are your thoughts on Joe Burrow and joining the Cincinnati Bengals under head coach Zach Taylor?
I think it'll be a good fit since Joe Burrow is more suited for today's NFL. He's pretty mobile as a quarterback, and Zach Taylor always ran a fast-paced offense. So I believe that Joe Burrow could do well under Zach Taylor.
And that leaves the question of Andy Dalton. I shared with you guys in our group chat that I wrote this article for the website about how, maybe the Steelers would trade for Andy Dalton just to have some, life insurance behind Ben Roethlisberger, because we all saw how Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges last year were a little inconsistent, or a lot inconsistent. And a lot of people really just jump down. No, that's not happening. We don't want it. Never in a million years. But Andy Dalton isn't going to want to take a back seat to Joe Burrow and just sit there the whole year. So where do you guys see Andy Dalton landing now?
That's a good question. There are a lot of teams that have kind of settled on their quarterback situation. The Steelers being one of them. However, I don't know, just because you've got a guy like Jameis Winston who just signed with New Orleans, reportedly. A lot of teams don't have necessarily the cap to take on a fairly decent paid backup quarterback, especially one that, and Andy Dalton hasn't really won a lot throughout his career. I think that, personally, the Steelers seem to be sold on Mason Rudolph as a backup quarterback. And, that's a whole other topic that I won't get into right now. But I think the gist that I have really to say is that, with a backup quarterback, they're expected to come in and kind of manage the game and not necessarily be the next guy. Obviously, if it's a younger guy, yeah, you would like him to be the heir apparent to your current quarterback. But a guy like Andy Dalton, to get paid the money that he does and kind of underperform, I mean, it would be a good fit for a team like the Steelers, I guess, but it's not something that they're necessarily going to entertain. So to kind of take a stab at where Andy Dalton's going to end up, I can't really give an affirmative team, but I can say that it's probably going to be somebody who has an issue with their backup quarterback, because I don't see him going anywhere where he's going to be given the reins to start for a team.
Yeah, great points all around. AJ, do you have any kind of predictions on where Andy Dalton will go, or if he even stays in Cincinnati this year, because he has another year left on his contract?
I wouldn't be surprised if Dalton stays, because Zach Taylor might not be pleased with having Ryan Finley as a backup. So I guess wouldn't be surprised if Andy Dalton stays for the last year.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think another thing to point out, too, is if he does stay in Cincinnati, and, let's just say this is more than likely going to happen, but let's just say Joe Burrow does become the starting quarterback. He's going to need to learn from somebody who has been in the NFL for a while, and that person being Andy Dalton. But now you have to think of it, well, what if Andy Dalton doesn't have the best, attitude about it? I couldn't see him being like that just because of the type of person he is. I know he is very big on, charity work, and he does a lot with his wife with they have a foundation and stuff. So he just seems like a good guy. So I couldn't see him being very stingy about being the backup and having to train Joe Burrow. But I think that no matter what, if he stays in Cincinnati this year, he's going to be talking with his agent. He's going to be talking with other players, and he's going to be trying to find a new place to go in 2021. I don't know if he'll leave in 2020 because of that contract. I think that contract is definitely going to play a role on if teams are going to want him or not. Because, Cody, you brought up a great point with the money. I mean, he is getting paid starting quarterback money, and I don't think any team is going to want to pay him starting quarterback money to be a backup. So, speaking of potential backup quarterbacks, the Green Bay Packers kind of dropped a bomb during the NFL draft. I think aside from Joe Burrow getting picked, I think this was kind of the biggest thing that happened in the draft that night. And I remember it was like the draft went on like an hour and like 15 or 20 minutes later than it should have. So this happened at like 11:45 at night, and everyone's tired. Everyone wants to go to bed unless you're on like the West Coast. And then Green Bay picks Jordan Love, a quarterback, to come into the fold. And everyone immediately hops on Twitter and is like, what about Aaron Rodgers? What's going on there? What do you guys think of the pick? Should Aaron Rodgers be afraid? And what happens now with him?
So I actually wrote an article for a website called The Score Crow when this happened. I personally love the pick. I think that when you look at, Aaron Rodgers, he's getting older. I mean, he's not at the end of his career by any means. Obviously, he took them to the AFC Championship last year, and I think it's safe to say that he's the one that took them there because outside of Aaron Jones, they really don't have many offensive weapons. The thing that confused me really about the pick was that they traded up. I don't think there was any team, what would they trade up? About 4 picks? I don't think there was any team in that range that was going to take him. And I read a report today that they were even trying to trade up even further. I think it was with the Vikings, who had pick 22, I believe. So, I mean, they were going to move up as far as 22 to take a guy that probably would have been there at their pick. The only, and I said this in the article that I wrote, I love the pick, but I think if the Packers didn't take a wide receiver at some point in the draft, then the pick becomes really confusing. Somehow the Packers found a way not to take a receiver in this draft, despite it being one of, if not the deepest wide receiver class that we've had in a long time coming out. There was big names as far as the eye could see when it came to this draft class in the wide receiver position, but they didn't take anybody, and that's really shocking. I mean, they've got a guy like Davante Adams, but he's not going to be there much longer. I think his contract's coming up, and he's getting paid a lot of money right now. So with a guy like that, you have Aaron Rodgers, who I think would clamor to have a big-time receiving target. Even another guy in the room with Davante Adams, they really could use another, even 2 wide receivers, and unfortunately for him, he didn't get it. But as far as Love goes, I mean, he's very raw, and I think he's one of those guys in this draft that has the potential to be one of the better quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback. I think he has that much talent, but it's a lot of raw talent. So hopefully a guy like Rodgers, who does have an ego, hopefully he takes him under his wing and doesn't let this become an issue, because I certainly could see a guy like Rodgers asking for a trade out of Green Bay, especially with this happening. And you have a guy who, in Matt LaFleur, is their coach, I think really was able to bond with Rodgers last year because it was evident that Rodgers and Mike McCarthy had some kind of rift going on, and I think that's really what deteriorated that relationship and caused them to move in a different direction. And it's obviously a lot easier to get rid of your head coach than it is your franchise quarterback. But this is the kind of move, and we saw this with Roethlisberger. I think he originally felt threatened by Mason Rudolph and then realized, he's the guy. And I think that's something that Rodgers needs to get a grip on, is that I don't think Green Bay is necessarily trying to force him out with this move. But then again, they do have a new front office, so maybe they're not as attached to Rodgers as maybe another team that needs a quarterback would be. So that's my thought on the whole situation.
Yeah, that's great analysis there, Cody. I think in regard to kind of looking at the Andy Dalton and Aaron Rodgers thing, I totally agree that Aaron Rodgers would be the guy to ask out for a trade first. I couldn't see him, willingly accepting a backup role, because you are absolutely right. He does certainly have an ego. AJ, any thoughts on Aaron Rodgers, Green Bay Packers, and, of course, the new Packer, Jordan Love?
This wasn't necessarily a bad pick. I understand what they're trying to do. The pick I was more concerned with was their pick of A.J. Dillon, a running back, in the second round, when they could have picked a receiver there, because they didn't need another running back when they have Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams.
Yeah, totally agreed. Like Cody said, this has been such a heavy wide receiver draft, one of the best, certainly in the last few modern draft eras. So, pretty straightforward question here. Who won the NFL draft? Who lost the NFL draft?
So, I think the Colts may have come away as the biggest winner of this draft this season. I am a big proponent of both Michael Pittman and Jonathan Taylor. I was really hoping that maybe if they were there when the Steelers had picked, that they'd have been guys that they would look into. I didn't think that they would make it, but with the way some of these guys were falling, I think it was at least a hope that they would get them. And even, to go out and get a guy like Jacob Eason, I think that's a guy that isn't necessarily I wouldn't say a franchise quarterback, but I think he's a stable type of quarterback that if they wanted to go to him at some point, he's a guy that could definitely win some games for that organization. I think the Browns did a really good job as well this year, getting a guy like Jedrick Wills on the offensive line and giving Baker kind of that security to be able to not have to run for his life like he did a lot last year. I think that contributed to a lot of his struggles. They got a guy like Grant Delpit, who's I also was very high on, the safety. And, I think now the Browns have the offensive weapons and there's no excuse for them. They can't really blame anything, on Baker, because now he's got everything he needs to succeed. He's got an offensive tackle. He certainly has the weapons on offense as far as the running back position and wide receiver positions are concerned. And my losers in the draft, I had the Packers as one of them, especially because, like I said, I love the Jordan Love pick, but they didn't give A-Rod, and that's Aaron Rodgers, a lot of help. And I think the Pats are actually a loser as well. They've been as successful as they have for how long now, but they don't have Tom Brady, and they really didn't add anything offensively to help their younger quarterbacks that they're going to have, and especially not taking a quarterback was really concerning and surprising to me.
AJ, who do you have for your winner and loser for the NFL draft?
For my winner, I had the Baltimore Ravens, just because every pick of theirs was great value. That they had like immense talent just fall to their laps each pick. And for my losers, I have to go with the Packers, just because they didn't address the need at wide receiver. And they took a position that they didn't really need depth in, that was running back.
I agree with you on the winner. I also had the Baltimore Ravens as my winner. I really loved the pick of Patrick Queen. He is an excellent linebacker. I think he's going to terrorize some quarterbacks in the AFC, especially in the AFC North. J.K. Dobbins, obviously a guy that we've talked about multiple times already tonight and who has been talked about throughout the draft. He is a great pick. They got a couple wide receivers too. They got, I believe this is Kevin Duvernay is how you say his name. And then they got later in the rounds, James Proche, if that's how you say his last name. I guarantee none of these players are listening, but if you happen to stumble by and I butcher your last name, I apologize. I think for my loser, I would have to say the Rams, just because I understand the Cam Akers pick as a running back, but he's not going to replace Todd Gurley, and I think that they needed to trade up to get a good running back. Just my opinion, but I just didn't see them having a great draft, and I'm not one to really draft kickers. I think that you could get a kicker, pardon my ignorance if I am wrong on this, but I think you can get them undrafted and signed. So I think that drafting a kicker when it's such a heavy wide receiver class and there still are great wide receivers in the later rounds, I think that's a little bit of a head scratching move. So with that said, just to make a note for everyone, whether you guys want to comment on this or not, feel free to, but there are, people making these theories on Twitter, on Facebook, on all kinds of social media about how the Patriots did not draft a quarterback like everybody thought they were because, of course, Tom Brady is now in Tampa Bay. They did not draft a quarterback, so next year they could get Clemson quarterback Trevor Lawrence. And I think that is baloney because there's no way that Bill Belichick would ever throw a season for a college quarterback. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not, but that's just what I think. And I think all of these people hypothesizing this are just out of their mind.
Yeah, I mean, I like Trevor Lawrence. I think he's going to be a fantastic NFL quarterback. I don't think that, like you said, Bill Belichick would ever throw a season. I certainly think that if he felt motivated enough that Lawrence could be his guy, he could trade up for him. But I think when you look at it realistically, Bill Belichick's probably heading towards the end of his career. I'm actually shocked, and I know him and Brady kind of had the reported spat, but I think a lot of the season's going to be about how Brady kind of wants to show Belichick up, and Belichick kind of wants to show Brady up as a more, I can do this without you kind of thing. And I think that Belichick wants to succeed with somebody who, kind of like Brady. I mean, Brady was a 6th-round pick. Nobody expected him to have anywhere near the type of career he's had, and now he's potentially the best quarterback in the NFL's history. And I think Belichick is going to try and take Jarrett Stidham and make him into a guy that can make the Patriots a Super Bowl contender. I don't believe that he's going to, but I think in Belichick's mind, he would rather win with a less established guy to make himself look better than to go out and get a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who you could say, well, Belichick's a great coach, but it's really Lawrence doing all the heavy lifting for him. Because I think a lot of people believe that Tom Brady did a lot of the work in the Belichick era, and I think Belichick's ego wants to prove everybody wrong.
Jarrett Stidham is a quarterback from Auburn. I never knew about him until this past offseason when everyone Googled him and he was trending on Twitter. So there's my New England quarterback knowledge that isn't Tom Brady. So that's pretty much going to wrap up our first ever podcast. You can follow the website on Twitter at PGH Sports Castle. We have some awesome content coming up. Our friend Antonio Wolf said that he's going to have some content coming later this week, so that's exciting. He always does a great job for us on the Pirates coverage that he does. We're going to have some draft analysis coming up in addition to this podcast, so that's really exciting. And guys, why don't you share your Twitter handles and any final thoughts that you have?
Yeah, so you can follow my personal Twitter. It's Cody_625. And my devoted Pittsburgh sports page is at Let's Talk PIT. So Let's Talk Pitt.
AJ, where can the awesome viewers find you at on the Twitter machine?
You could follow me at AMRocks2002.
And you can follow me at Rachael Kriger. That is 2 A's, not 1. I do not spell my name like most other Rachels, so apologies for the confusion on that. Listeners, if you have any ideas for any podcast prompts and topics, feel free to reach out to members of our team and our Pittsburgh Sports Castle Twitter, Facebook page, anywhere you can find us to send some ideas along. We obviously are not just covering the Steelers, we are covering all Pittsburgh sports. The NFL draft was the hottest thing right now, so that's what we wanted to talk about. But we also cover, of course, the Penguins, the Pirates, the Riverhounds, the University of Pittsburgh. We cover Robert Morris and Duquesne. We have a really great staff, really great team, and we're just excited to do this podcast and kind of bring another wave of media to all of our faithful followers and devotees to the site. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you all next time.